Bhavna, what would you do? Is the situation. So you're in a meeting. So you're part of this meeting. It's about hiring. And the colleagues in this meeting agree that the most qualified candidate is a trans woman, but worry about how clients will respond to her. What would you do? What would you say?
So for me, the first thing that comes up is, well, for me, it's as long as we've got the most talented and the most suitable person in the role, that's first and foremost. In terms of how the clients or how some clients may perceive that. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm a questioner. So I'd probably ask again, where would this be coming from? You know, have there been any instances where you doubt what our clients would be thinking about our selection? But also, I think it would also be an opportunity whereby, you know, if I'm involved in the selection criteria for hiring, then first and foremost, it's the most suitable person, most qualified person for a job. But also, if there's an element, if there's a factor of someone being transgender and how that's put out there, in terms of clients, it would be a case of, okay, well, how are we seen as an organization? And I know lots of organizations, you know, they champion the transgender community. And so it would, if anything, it would be seen as a company being very forward thinking and being very inclusive. And so if anything, it would be seen in a positive light. Yeah, that's how I would probably see that. So it's basically, yes, it's the first and foremost is the right person for a job. But if it so happens that this individual is transgender, then that would be almost a bonus for the organization, because they're especially if it's their role, which is client facing, external stakeholders, because they're representing the organization. Whenever there's a role where it includes managing external stakeholders, you're always representing that company. And if you're of transgender identity, then it's literally a case of you're still doing your job, but the fact of the matter is that you're also representing an extension of that company. So your company is being seen as inclusive.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Love that. I was thinking the same. The first question I'd ask is, well, what are the values of our company? Like, what are our values? And like, speak to that, because which is essentially similar. What are our values? Our values are what we stand for. And you would think that that is the reason why you have customers, because let's face it, most companies are not monopolies. Most companies have competitors, and there's particular reasons why people go with one company versus another company. So, and often that's your values and whether you live by your values. So if your company has the values of inclusivity, equality, fairness, diversity, whatever qualities speak to having representation in the company, then I imagine that comment would be very strange to hear in that context, right? But I would say, whoever said that, I'd be like, oh, where does that comment come from? Like, what are you thinking could happen?
It's also quite a sensitive one, because again, if you're in a group and this is part of a selection conversation, and if it's come from one person, you also need to be careful about the approach, about how you feedback to that one person, because we don't want to, again, it's a case of not necessarily wanting to put them on the spot, because at the end of the day, workplaces, they ideally are a safe place where you can.
Yeah, I'm not saying, well, if they've obviously felt safe enough to say that.
Yeah, that's true.
So they've said it. So, you know, you're asking, well, does anybody else have concerns about that? You would probably put it out to everybody there, not just that person. Anybody else concerned about that? And even just that question may have other people speaking to why it's not a problem, saying things like what you just said, or if they have concerns, they'd also voice it and you can address it. But I'm imagining if that person is comfortable saying that, then they've already got an environment that feels like a safe space to bring up your opinions.
But it definitely hones in on the representation and inclusion, so which is very important. So yeah. But nowadays, companies have those. When it comes to the interview process, you normally have that selection criteria where, as a candidate or an interviewer, you have to tick boxes.
Yeah, well, that's why they're there. So you don't
exactly why it's there, because the company would hopefully use that information to those,
So you're eliminating things like unconscious bias. Exactly. But here is what it says. It says why it matters. It says it's inappropriate to speculate about how clients would respond to someone's gender identity, just as it would be about their religious faith or ethnicity.
Yes.
True. If it was a Black person or an Indian person or Asian person or just a woman, or, you know, she's the best candidate, but how would clients respond? Well, yeah, okay. It's not appropriate legally even.
That's right. And also interesting how this is part of the what would you do section, because just this week I've been applying for a few jobs, contractor, and I've had that question put forward in applications about 3 times this week, and on each of those occasions I've declined because it has no relevance for me being able to do the job.
You mean like tick the box of what you fit in ethnicity wise? Yes, I totally get that feeling because I do that as well. I would tick other. However, the other side of that is they need to make sure that they hire a diverse workforce.
Right.
So how are they going to know to do that if they don't know?
I tend to consider, okay, is this a boutique company that I'm applying for, or is this a big multinational global? And that's also what makes my decision about that tick box section. Well, maybe we should extend this conversation about the tick box section.
Oh, don't even get started on the tick box.
That is a whole new can of worms. But it's valid for this particular podcast subject.
It is. We'll talk about that.
Take some time to that.
Yeah. Because I don't even know what to tick. I get annoyed. I was put of that. But anyway, another time.
For our listeners, let's look out for a podcast which is dedicated to this tick
box. Yeah. So, as we said, it's inappropriate to speculate about how clients will respond to someone's gender identity, the same as it would be if it was about their religious faith or ethnicity. I guess I'm just thinking another scenario like this that I just made up in my head. A woman that wears a burqa, for example. That could be another example. But anyway, the discussion harms company culture because it could make it feel acceptable to discriminate against trans people, or a woman wearing a burqa, or a woman of color, or a man of color, or a specific faith. Yeah. So there is that. And then it says what you could do. So what you could do is you could remind the group that they all agreed that she was the most qualified candidate, and push back against the idea that you should give up on the strongest hire. You can also point out to some of her specific qualifications and experience that fit the criteria for the role. All right, so I guess what it's saying is just it's not even telling you to go there. It's going the opposite of what we just talked about. It's saying just focus on skills and qualifications, which is the whole point. That's guess what that's saying. I would do both, actually. I would do both.
I would definitely champion the factor of representation and how we look as an organization, because especially as if the questions aimed in there or brought up in a selection criteria, that means it's human resources, and and every department contributes to what the values of a company are. And so being able to, as a HR individual in this scenario, you're putting together groups based on their talents and suitability and skill set. But also, it'd be great to also positive bias be also aligning with the values, as you've mentioned. So, yeah,
exactly. And why it happens. It says that transgender people often experience workplace mistreatment, including difficulties getting hired and promoted. This mistreatment is often due in part to concerns that clients and other employees, and this is actually something else, other employees. I remember a whole thing at my last workplace about wearing the rainbow lanyard.
Okay, yes.
Rainbow lanyard to show your support for the LGBTQI plus community. And the discussion went whether you should have to wear it or not. But anyway, employees are also people to consider, not just other employees, are also people to consider, not just clients. But this mistreatment is often due in part to concerns that the clients and other employees have negative attitudes towards transgender people. In this case, allowing such concerns to determine who gets hired results in discrimination against trans women. So basically, that's specific to trans women, but you could easily put in another minority in there.
Yeah.
A type of person. Like I mentor women who have experience of the criminal justice system. I'm a mentor for a charity that I support, and they find it very difficult to find work, generally speaking, not so easy. So I can imagine this conversation about someone who has that background. How would clients respond? But I mean, why would clients even need to know anyway? But I can imagine a similar conversation, even if they were the best candidate.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it. Anyway, I digress.
Yes, but it's an interesting one because it definitely opens up a broader topic, which I definitely think we should look to cover and devote more time to.
Yeah, that would be great. Wonderful. So in this, what would you do? It's a workplace scenario. We like workplace scenarios, and so many of us spend so much time there. You can imagine you're in a debrief after a round of job interviews. So you're not being interviewed. You're a part of this committee debriefing, picking a candidate, right? You've been part of the interview process. Mm-hmm. And someone else says of a candidate that this candidate seemed a little OCD. So my question then to you is, what would you do? What would you do? What would you do?
I smiled just then. That brought a huge smile to my face. The reason being is because I have actually been in this situation in real life.
Oh.
So the situation that happened was I was in a role where there was a finance department who needed support, who needed mentorship, but also needed some processes and someone to oversee the whole of that finance department. And I was given the task of recruiting for this particular role. And so I'd sent out a job description and wrote out an advert. There were so many applicants because it was quite a popular place of work. Mm-hmm. And I was just sifting through these applications. I'd gone through so many rounds of telephone interviews, and I just couldn't find a candidate who was meeting the expectations of the role until I ended up meeting and interviewing a candidate, a male individual. He didn't have the previous experience, ideally, that was related to this particular role. However, the previous role that he'd worked in, he demonstrated transferable skills, and he gave examples very well of how he had added value in each of those finance areas to detail. And it was in that interview and the examples that he was giving that he gave rise to my colleague in a debrief sharing with me saying, Bhavna, I think this guy's great. He's got A, B, and C. I liked what he did here. I liked how he demonstrated this particular example. One thing that we would probably need to be mindful of is that I think he might be OCD.
Who said that?
My colleague said that to myself. So I was in the interview process. I was interviewing because I would be doing the selection, but I also, in interviews, you often have another person with you and to often debrief, but also they were acting as my assistant. But anyway, I always had her in my interviews. And it's always great when you're interviewing with another person because...
So this other person said, they made that remark?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And my response to that was, I think that's an advantage because the specific role that we have, we're failing at the moment, the department's failing at the moment is because there isn't enough attention to detail. Processes are not being followed. That's one of the main reasons this role has come up. There's no process being implemented. There's lack of attention to detail, and we need structure. And we're struggling to have the team members in the finance team work to these structures. If we bring in someone who is, as you say, OCD, that's a benefit. That's exactly what we play to. We basically use the fact that there's OCD here in this individual, and because let's say, for example, they take this job and the approach to that they bring is of a very OCD ilk. That can only benefit us.
Okay. So what were the characteristics that made it give it that label?
The characteristics was when he was describing the situations that he'd been in.
Yeah.
He described it and he was being very meticulous, and he was describing how he had been very meticulous. And on more than one occasion, he also threw in that he is probably OCD.
Oh, he said that.
He said that he probably is. He said it in jest.
Yeah.
But at interview, that's why he said it in jest.
Right.
Also, I often ask about, if I don't ask about it directly, I often try to gauge what their working style is. To establish, are they going to be, how well are they going to be fitting into the existing team? What kind of energy are we going to bring to the team? What is the dynamic they're going to bring to the role? And from that answer, I also saw that this is an individual, when it comes to dotting the I's and crossing the T's, that he takes it to an absolutely different level. And it was that kind of level that I was looking for my finance team.
Okay. All right. Well, I agree. This is good. This is a good example then, because I agree, everybody's got a different style of communicating, learning, and how they work. And it sounds to me like that person was highly logical, organized, and structured, which is really valuable skill for some roles. And you obviously recognize that for whatever that job was. How it's a problem, which is what we talk about, is the label, because this is why it matters. So when people casually misuse terms for real mental health issues like OCD, it trivializes the conditions and the difficulties faced by those who have them. If others with mental health issues hear comments like this may make them feel belittled. And I agree. I've misused the term OCD I've used that term until I really, read more and things like this. I have in the past used those terms to describe myself, even in some scenarios. The comment could also unfairly harm the candidate's chance of getting a job, as it's a vague critique that's not tied to a job requirement. And I think that's really important then, to make that distinction. It's about a style of working and is nothing to do with what we think OCD actually is. And so that's how it's kind of misused. And then I guess, does that matter? He, in your specific situation, he misused the term himself. I mean, unless he's actually been diagnosed with it.
So that's an interesting one, because it was actually how it eventually, it was like, I did give him a job. And after he joined, I was noticing that there was a strict routine that he was following, to the point where I had to have a conversation about working hours and breaks and so forth. Wasn't anything major, but it was definitely noticeable that it was almost on the dot. It was like a routine, like Groundhog Day. And we had an open conversation about that. And that's when he did actually share that he hadn't been diagnosed, but that he was aware that when it comes to routine, he is very particular, and it makes him feel nervous when a routine is broken. So, and again, I actually attributed that to, well, not attributed that, but I again suppose saw more focus on the fact that we're in a workplace, and as long as your job is being done, and the fact that this routine that he lives by, he had implemented that in his work, and we needed structure, we needed routine, and it validated that I had made the decision for the best person for this job.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But the skills, we've got the right skills and they're working for the job, absolutely. But the point is about the misuse of the term when it's appropriate.
I think it's an interesting one, because when it comes to labeling, I think I've heard labeling being thrown around a lot, and it is getting a bit out of hand. When you're talking in jest about or being OCD or even being bipolar, for example, I've heard that a lot. And I think what's happening is that what I'm seeing now is that labels are just being misconstrued left, right, and center, to a point where it's such a blurred line. and it's not really being taken seriously.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? It can be perceived that way, especially, and even more so to someone who's suffered because of that, having that disease. Or maybe it might not be them, it might be somebody they love or care about has had to suffer with that disease that can be debilitating and have so many negative effects on their life. So to use so casually, misuse so casually, you can understand why that can hurt people, offend, make them feel belittled. And I guess this is the point that we're trying to make here. But also the fact that it's a very vague critique. And, you know, I actually, if I'm being honest, I would ask about what they meant by that, because I would want to know what characteristics led to that kind of label. And I'd be looking at characteristics. And then knowing now what I know now, because I wouldn't have known it years ago, you know, that those characteristics point to a very specific style. Or, yeah, maybe he was diagnosed with OCD. You know, I don't know. But then he would be having, the person they would be the ones that would have to share that for that to be relevant. But anyway, he says, you could ask the person that said that, how does that relate to the job requirements? Go either way.
I think it does, that's right.
Yeah. Or let them know the language is problematic. You might not know this, but casually calling someone OCD can be harmful to people with mental health conditions, and then explain why. And then you could take it further with HR and asking them to raise awareness about mental health issues in general. And actually, that was something that happened for me because I was a people manager. I got the opportunity to do mental health first aid, to be trained in mental health first aid. And that led to changes in HR policies, and also led to an awareness of things like that, how commonly misused and how it can make people living with other people or living with the health issue themselves feel when you misuse terms that way. So that's good. So you could talk to HR about training that encourages employees to use more inclusive language. To me, that just means not using exclusive language. And why it happens.
I suppose it's being considerate in the language you use, full stop.
Yeah, exactly. And just consider it in the things that come out of your mouth, generally. But anyway.
Full stop.
Yeah, full stop. But many people are in the habit of using terms like OCD casually and inaccurately, rather than in reference to the real conditions they're meant to describe.
In that situation that I described, you know, my colleague, I can honestly say, I can confidently say, she called out the OCD in the debrief, not with any malice, not with, you know, her intention was honorable, respectful. And I don't think she would have been, she's a considerate person, and I don't think it would have crossed her mind.
I hardly think people that use it casually are using it with any malice anyway.
You know,
it's just because it's like people that say I'm not racist, but most of those people don't feel they're racist and don't intentionally say or behave in a way intentionally that is racist, but they don't realize it is. And that's the point. They don't realize it is because they can't relate to that. And it's the same if you don't know someone that actually has OCD, or you don't have it yourself, you can't maybe understand how it's offensive to use it casually or inaccurately.
Yeah. I think what my colleague was saying was that he had OCD tendencies. So, you know, is that a label?
Well, you know, we're not here particularly to criticize your colleague. Your situation may have been different to what this situation is describing. And then the reason they give for why people casually use it is that maybe it's because they don't realize how likely it is that someone around them at work has a mental health condition. Maybe it's unseen, not as visible. And they talked about stats, but these stats are in the US. But I actually looked the stats up because I did a training for a company on stress specifically, on managing stress. And when I was delivering that workshop, I looked up stats on mental health in Australia. So in the US, it's 1 in 5 workers have mental health conditions. But in Australia, it was very close. I think it was like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 anyway. So it wasn't very different here. It says workers have that, but many don't disclose that at work. And it could be also because they haven't learned much about mental health issues. So that's me. If anything out of that, I would promote a mental health first aid as something they should do in workplaces. And especially for HR, absolutely. I think HR, it should be mandatory. People leaders, I think it should be mandatory, but something that should be promoted in workplaces. That's it. For sure. And that's what we get from that. But you're right. People that casually, ADHD is another one that now, especially today, gets thrown around so casually. Or I'm a bit ADHD. I hear that a lot.
Yeah. It does make me think about, the silent, what would you call them?
Conditions.
Yeah, the silent conditions that one has in the workplace, and how somebody, at the end of the day, it's as long as we can be considerate with the language we use.
Yeah, and I guess there's some people who just don't, maybe some people think it's too much or over the top, and they wouldn't speak if they had to think about every word they use. I can just imagine people thinking that and saying that. And I would just say, well, you know what? You're not always going to get it right. You're not always going to be able to be considerate. But to be intentionally inconsiderate when you've been told this is going to offend someone, that's different from unintentionally being, from not realizing that that's offending someone, that's different. And so we're always going to get it wrong. Well, that's just the way it is. That's life. Just try and get it better next time. You can do better next time.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to navigate through.
You've all been guilty of saying something not very considerate. I mean, this is not a comparison, but all the time I'm not very considerate. It's because I'm somewhere else. I'm not thinking about that. I remember once, it's really not comparing the two, but just thinking, when's the time been where I've been really not my considerate self? I was in a lift with my mum. I'm getting out the lift, and somebody held the door, and we got out. And when we got out, my mum turns out to me to say, "You didn't even say thank you." To me, right? She go, proper telling me off. And this is me as an adult, not a child. Proper telling me off. And I'm just like, no, and that's inconsiderate. And I'm often inconsiderate. And it's not because I'm not a considerate person. It's because I wasn't thinking. I was somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah, somewhere else at the time. So that's a really lame example. But we all have examples where we've not been considerate.
Yeah. And I think what I'm thinking of is I've actually been in the flip side. I've been on the other side of that, where I do have a silent condition. It doesn't, fortunately for me, it doesn't impact my working ability and potential. But it's there. I'd rather not have it escalated. And I certainly would not want my peers at work being reminded about, the language that they use around this condition. It just brings more highlight to something that I would just like to get on with my job for.
Because it's different if it's personal to you. That's different. If you're the one, you shouldn't have to be the one if it's about yourself. I don't know, because I don't really understand what you're talking about. And that's another part of it. If it affects you directly, because this is not a scenario where it affects them directly, shouldn't always have to be the one. It's like to educate other people. And that's a separate thing from wanting to not identify as whatever it is. That's, again, separate. That scenario about the OCD isn't talking about a person that might have it and identifying it and being out of work about having that condition. Because you're right, they may not want that to be about them and who they are. And that's fine. This is about how I can feel when people trivialize it and they may overhear that. That's more about what it is. It's about the misuse of using those kind of terms. It's very different from having to pull someone up on something that affects you personally and having to be the one to do that.
Well, and I think it's important to note that what that response article is saying is that it's notifying it on a general level.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. That's why I said mental health first aid. It's a general thing. It's about the general idea of trivializing conditions by misusing them as casual things. It's very general. Yeah. All right, so what would you do? So this is in the context of hiring in the workplace again.
Yeah.
So you're hiring, you've got the candidates, and you're one of your colleagues says, this guy's going to be great. He's got so much potential. And then you've got this woman who has proven experience in the role that you're recruiting for. Mm-hmm. So he's advocating for the man with potential over the woman with experience. Does it matter? What would you do?
I would look at the bigger picture in that scenario of a man with strong potential versus a woman with proven experience. Because if there's a suggestion that the man should be hired, I'd be looking at a bigger picture in terms of, okay, on what basis, like what potential would the man be bringing to the role which this lady has not yet proven?
That's not the context. The context is he's never done the role, but he's got potential to do the role, and she's done the role.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. I see. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Well, in that case, it would be a case of, well, why would we, like, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Why are we looking at, why are we looking at replacing a woman who's done a fabulous job so far, but she's obviously proven herself and her skill set in this role.
Oh, it's not the same role. It's more like maybe she came from another company doing the same job. So they're both going for the same job.
All right. I see. Okay. Right. Okay. I see.
And this guy's not done the job, but he's got potential. Yeah. This woman's done the job.
Yeah.
Got experience.
Okay. Again, that would be a bigger picture for me. So I'd be asking, okay, well, is it going to save us time and money? If we're looking to save time and money, then that's great. Let's go for a woman, because you know what? It's hit the ground running. We don't have to worry about that. She's proven her skill set. She can implicate ideas and solutions and work practices which she's clearly had success with previously. We don't have to worry about that. We're saving time and money. Whereas if we select the man, then we're going to be, it's seen more as an investment. Like, what are we looking to mold somebody in this role? Or, why would we be looking to put invest more time and money into the option with the person who happens to be a male in this option? So I'm not sure, Tracy, if this is actually a gender-led query or situation, should I say? Because let's turn it around and say, well, if there's a position and there's a woman with strong potential and a man who's got proven experience, I would also be saying the same thing. Let's look at the bigger picture.
Okay. Well, in what context would you pick somebody with potential over somebody with the actual experience?
In a case whereby if I was in a business where the business was looking to invest time and energy and money into a role whereby they wanted either some more input into the role, they wanted a change of direction in that role, or they wanted a new fresh pair of eyes, then it would be worthwhile seriously considering the person in this situation, the male. Whereas a person who's proven to do the role in another space but has applied for this position, I'd be thinking, okay, well, if I don't have time and money, I've got another area of business which I want to focus on. This woman who's got a proven experience would be ideal, because I can simply put her in a role and she can run with it. I can trust her. I can just basically leave her to it because it's proven. Whereas someone who hasn't done a role but they have potential, you don't know what they're going to bring. You don't know how the dynamic of what they bring is going to alter all the other divisions in your organization. You don't even know which direction they're going to take, what kind of approach they're going to take, and that takes a lot of I suppose that time and energy, and also you're sacrificing money in that, and so it's more of a sacrifice. And if you've got time and energy, and that's where you want your company to be heading, then yes, it's worthwhile seriously considering the male with the potential. But if you want to save time and money and you want to invest in other parts of your business, then it's a no-brainer to get somebody who's done a role before and has got proven success in that role and who's interested.
Mm.
So for me, it's not gender driven, because let's say if I turn it around, like I often do in these scenarios where I'm thinking, okay, well, if that was a woman in a man's position and vice versa, I would still be saying the same thing.
Mm. Okay, that's interesting. So if I'm thinking, I've not read the answers yet. So I'm thinking I'm hiring someone, usually, unless it's a junior role, it's for me, the only reason you would hire someone with potential is if it's a junior role. And as part of a promotion, right? And this is not a promotion. So that would be, for me, that would be the only circumstances where I'd hire someone with potential. If it's a role where I want them to know what they're doing, because if you're hiring someone potential, it's a lot of, like you say, time, money, energy, because you still have to train them. I mean, you have to train everyone, but you still have to train them a lot of hand-holding if they've never done the job before. Versus, I need somebody who can do this job. This person's got experience, they're interested. This person's got potential and they're interested. To me, it's a no-brainer. You choose the person with experience, not with potential, unless it's a junior role, because they're both going to bring fresh pair of eyes, regardless of potential or experience, because it's a different job. It's a more higher job or whatever. But go on.
Sorry, Tracy, but it could be. I mean, I know you mentioned about it's applicable to a junior position, but maybe not. Let's say I've been in lots of positions or lots of companies I've been in where they've needed a head of a division, which includes that's executive leadership level.
Yeah.
And there has been lots of times when there's been external candidates who may not necessarily have led a division, but have had experience in leading and managing teams.
Yeah, I get that.
Their next step up. But then there's also interest from other divisions of different companies whereby it would be a sidestep when it's a different industry. So it's like, so in that example, which I'm applying to this, that's how I'm looking at it, is that it's somebody who has got potential, who's probably ready for that.
Yeah, I get your situation's right as well. I'm not saying you're wrong. What I'm saying is, what situation would I go with the experience over potential, or the two different situations? Like I said, if it was junior, I'm looking for somebody with potential. If it was, I want someone who can do the job, I'm looking for somebody with experience. Yeah. So if we assume, because we don't know the context, so many bigger pictures, but the point that it's trying to make, let's assume this is for a job. We want somebody who knows what they're doing. Yet, the guy's advocating for someone with potential versus someone with experience. And if it was a common thing, but anyway, we don't know if it's a common thing. But anyway, why it matters, because you're right. It depends on the strategy of the company. It depends on the person with potential. What skills do they actually have? Are they transferable? And maybe that's why they have potential. I don't know.
What does the answer say?
The answer says, when a more experienced candidate is passed up, and actually, I'll come back. I'll remind me to tell you a story after this. When a more experienced candidate is passed up in favor of someone with less experience, your company can miss out on valuable wisdom, talent, and skill. And in this case, the woman loses out on an opportunity that she's well suited for. It says what to do. You could point out how experienced the woman is for the role and note the value of proven experience over potential. You might also take a moment to explain why it happens and why it matters. Longer term, it's worth recommending that everyone on your team aligns ahead of time on clear, objective criteria, because it would depend on the criteria for the role, right? For open roles. Then use them to evaluate all job candidates. This minimizes bias by making sure that every candidate is held to the same standard. And then this one says, research shows that people often hire or promote men based on their potential, but for women, potential isn't enough. Women are often held to a higher standard and need to show more evidence of their competence to get hired or promoted. So that's where the example comes from.
Because I think there's this, I can't remember where this research is from, but it's quite commonly known actually that when women apply for jobs, they basically make sure that every box is ticked before they apply. Whereas men, even if they tick 2 out of 5 boxes, they'll apply anyway. So that just goes to show that men, inherently seem to have this, I'm generalizing here, but that research shows, the interviewing and the applications, that research shows that it says that women they need to be certain, they need to be 100% confident they can do the role, and that eliminates potential. Whereas men can see that they can do A, B, and C, but may not be able to D and E, and they latch that onto potential and then apply.
Yeah, and that's how that actually marries with this. And it's like the chicken and the egg. It's like, is it the women know that that's how they're held to a higher standard? So they have to meet all the criteria. Is it because they know it? Yeah. Or is it because they've got some self-esteem issue?
That's it.
It's like, well, which came first?
Right.
Yeah. So that's why it matters.
And also, how you are relating it to, Tracy?
Yeah, is my dad. So he was working in a job where for years, and he became very good at this job. And so much so that he would start to train people, new like graduates and things. He started to train them in the job. Yeah. And he would constantly get overlooked for promotion to the extent where people he trained got promoted over him. And he believed it was discrimination. And so he sued the company. Now, he didn't win. He decided to settle. So he settled and got a payout or whatever. So whether he believed it was racism or it wasn't, he thinks it was, and I'll assume it was, because he had the experience, and he was so much so that he could teach other people, but to constantly be overlooked, and he believed it was because he was Black, and that was why, and that was the attitude. So,
which industry was this in, Tracy?
Oh, it was in like a printing industry. It was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, and then my dad will tell you stories of discrimination he faced when he was living in Britain.
Was this in the 60s and 70s that he had this experience in printing?
Well, no, this would be in the 80s.
The 80s,
90s,
right.
80s, 90s.
Because I'm thinking about how many, and in the printing industry, do you know like what sort of percentage was, not percentage, but do you know how many other minorities or people of color were working in the printing industry in the 80s, 90s?
No, it's not something I've ever researched. It's just the story he tells.
Yeah.
And it's stuck with me as well. And that's just an example. I feel kind of like it's similar to this. I'm not saying those people that got promoted didn't have potential, but they didn't have the experience. Mm-hmm. And so how do you justify that in certain situations? But like it says here, like we said, you need to agree before you need to agree on the criteria of what's going to be perfect. And if you can do that before you even interview people. You can already decide whether it's really good to have someone that maybe doesn't know the role so well, that has potential, or that whether you're really looking for someone with experience before you interview, then you can rule out that kind of bias.
Yeah. And also as an interviewer of a company, or of a role, if you've got a idea about, okay, yes, you want someone with more potential, but you end up interviewing someone who's experienced, ask those questions at interview about, and be transparent in terms of, okay, this is what we were looking for. How do you feel about this? What could you bring to the table? Or actually say, we were initially thinking that this would be a role where it'd have potential for the right candidate. However, you've got quite a lot of experience. How would you cope with that? And, where would you see the areas of opportunity and potential for you in this role?
Yeah, good questions. For sure. So there you go. Good combo. Well done. And then, it made me think about when I've hired people. I remember the last person I hired before I left my career was someone that purely hired on experience. Purely. And actually they had the opposite problem in that this person had more experience than was needed, as in they're more senior. There was they're coming down. Yeah. So, but that's not, as long as we're clear about that's what's happening, which we were, to me, it's their decision. Yeah. Which was the case. I feel they were torn between opportunity and but then again, it's a risk because they might leave. They get a better opportunity and leave. But anyway, that was my decision making last time I hired someone.
It sounds as though it was a case of identifying where that person's ceiling of potential was and seeing whether or not they were, hearing about whether or not, how were they planning to push through and smash through that ceiling of potential.
Well, yeah, I mean that was part of my job for like literally 5 minutes, because I wasn't there much longer. Was, okay, this person's overqualified or got more experience than we need. Can we also offer her a plan of a more advanced role in the company? What else could there be in a couple of years' time or whatever? So there was all that to consider. But yeah, that was my last experience. I haven't needed to hire anyone since. But yeah, good. All right, I'm going to let you go because I know you have a date.
Yes, we'll see how that goes. Let's see if he turns up.
Oh, don't say. Why would you even go with that thought?
Because I'm taking myself out. And this is the approach I'm using. I'm taking myself out and then putting out the open invitations in like, well, if you're available and free and you're interested in joining me, then please do.
Oh, so he didn't say yes, I will.
So how I'm doing it is I'm continuing on with what I normally do, and then extending out, saying, you know what, I'm doing this anyway. If you want to come along, it'd be great to find out more about you, an opportunity for you to learn about me. So.
Okay. So you're kind of, I mean, I don't know what you plan. So so it's kind of like, I'm going to be here doing this thing. If you want to come and meet me there, that'd be great. Up to you. But did he say, yes, I'll come?
Yes. So in a sense that, because it turned out, and I suppose it's by coincidence that what I'm going to be doing this afternoon, I normally do anyway, and it turns out like it's very similar. It was very near to where he lives,
right?
And so it's it's easy. It's and so we'll see. So in other words, if he doesn't turn up, that's fine, because I still would have done the activity anyway. But
all right,
and we'll see what happens.
All
but
right.
I'll keep you posted. I'll let you know how it goes in our next episode.